an introduction to what early 20th century avant-garde art is all about, through Strauss's provocation to a colleague, von Blankenberg, on the occasion of the release of Heidegger's 1950 work on the work of art, or on the origins of the work of art. So naturally, so let's present this as a guide to the perplexed being those who don't get the point. So there's a lot of people that don't take the point of modern art and regard it as repulsive somehow. So this is actually meant to give an avenue onto modern art, which presents it as Calon, or beautiful, but not because it's like the Nike at Samothrace, or, by which I don't mean to mean it indicate a destroyed work, but a work that indicate that if you look at it, you can see there's some kind of there's a peculiar elegance in the complexity of the ripples of the garment worn by the figure of Nike or Victory, which illustrates the idea in a beautiful way. But here, the beauty is the beauty of trying to get genuine contact with the subject matter of European science, or of taken more broadly, of the Western tradition, because we don't do that by merely getting information about the Western tradition without finding some way to invade it and to make it our own. So let's look at this Heideggerian question. So I think von Blankenhaugen, about 1954, finally succumbed to Strauss's provocations and made some answer about what his opinion was about Heidegger's work, and he raised this complaint that why is Heidegger telling us that the Van Gogh shoes give us a shortcut, quote unquote, into the issues Heidegger's trying to get at. Why wouldn't just looking at shoes directly be better? So let's try to do that not through the Van Gogh work, but let's think about a work that Heidegger has mentioned on other occasions, which is the Franz Marc's, trying to think of in English, the Deer in the Woods, or Deer in the Forest 2. I think it's something like it's not the usual word for deer. It's something like Ruhe am Volta Zwei, and it's 1914. But you could easily find that. So the claim is, so now let's look at a simple Heideggerian concept, try to put together a number of things into, and say they're part of one concept. So one is the idea that the nothings, or Nishtet, I think it's said. And the other is the early work This is not the way Heidegger would present it. I'm only trying to give some avenue which gives a chance to connect and get a foothold on the material. So Oswald Kolpe, is considered as one of the founders of the modern psychology in connection with Wilhelm Wundt in some way. He was like a student of Wundt. But he ran a bunch of experiments, which the gist of which was to say, if you put somebody in sensory deprivation and then you ask them to imagine something such as the color green, most people can picture green to themselves, but some people can't. But does that mean that these people that can't do not know what green is? And his conclusion is they do. So even from total sensory deprivation and also without any inner picture or imagination, nonetheless, they know what green is, as proved by when they see green, they recognize it immediately. In this sense, usually, so let's starting with that. Let's say, usually, we think of a work of art as depicting something which either could be inwardly pictured or which has a special example in the world, from which it's there's a particular deer, and then somebody makes an artwork of that, and then in some cases it's an expressionistic artwork. But in the case of Der Blaue Reiter, or the Blue Rider group, I believe they have the special motivation which is different from expressionism. So and it's a scientific motivation. So I think this is the attractive part about it. What they're trying to do is something connected to the problems of modern psychology and to the ancient problem of the one and the many, or of methexis in the Platonic sense. These deer in the forest are not that. So first of all, the deer in the forest are clearly not on this oil on canvas. They're clearly not meant to be a particular deer that somebody saw on an occasion in the walk in the woods. Now there's a second question: are they meant to be a visionary who, thinking of the problem of the one and the many, then attempts to start with the essence of deer and the life of deer and the world of deer, just as in the case of Heidegger saying there's a shortcut through the Van Gogh painting because we get immediately into the whole world of the peasant, whose shoes those were. Remembering that Heidegger doesn't speak pejoratively of peasants. He is a peasant himself. So we could think of one, a representation of a visionary putting the idea itself onto the canvas. We could think of two, of this Wilhelm Wundt question, where then one could think immediately, for instance, is it a species of neuron, which is the green neuron, but in this case the deer in the forest neuron, which populates the artist's head, but they currently don't have an image of it. They currently don't have a particular thing behind it. But nonetheless, they have the species of neuron. Put that way, it would be an empirical. We'd get caught in some empirical problems because the neuron would have had a Darwinian past and it grew in a certain situation. And then we wouldn't get to the nick-nick-tet, the nothing, that nothings. But then, okay, there's another level we could say, is it a depiction out of the nothing that nothings? Because you have total sense deprivation, and also you do not have an image, or the person doesn't have an inner image or imagination, or phantasm, I think. Or Aristotle would have called it that way, I believe. But neither do you assume that it has anything to do with the neuron species or with the brain or with anything else. Then we could also try different ways to approach this question. So then I would put it this way. What would remain, in what I said, what would remain to show is why the question is cogent and where, when we're doing, where this connects up with other problems which are of direct importance for ordinary life. But I think that suggests why in the better cases we have in both in early 20th century avant-garde art, which then in certain cases like the iconic religions, or like the theory of the unconscious, brings us to a different pattern of thinking about things. So if you think of the iconic religions and think of Plotinus, it says we leaving the temple images behind. Then we, as it were, this is the mystic's direction. You have to leave the temple images behind. Or in the certain modern theories of psychoanalysis, where the unconscious, as Jung says, it really is unconscious, or is thought this way. And then it remains to be shown, I don't say it remains to be shown in general, but in this presentation I don't demonstrate the cogency of the further question of whether these are to be conceived as sort of hypotheses or frames in which we can then say somehow it's more fruitful to approach the subject with these frames, or whether we're speaking, as it were, more directly about being. And so I think that gives an indication of how, in the more serious cases, both the avant-garde and the modern and postmodern artists, I know somebody will insult me and say I don't know anything about this subject unless they say, yes, I understand postmodern had to do originally with architecture and modernism, postmodernism, maybe brutalism is a form of postmodernism, escape from modernism, maybe modernism is a way of refusing the Enlightenment, and maybe it's not, and certainly in native loose, I don't know if it is. But in some cases, Aimé Césaire, for instance, in this negritude movement, this is certainly going towards an total repudiation of the Enlightenment. But again, in all these cases, the question, by transfer of meaning, let's say it's like the question of good fiction. It's like almost all fictional books are terrible, but then there's a few of them that are really good. So like Balzac, for instance. There's a few authors that really do things that are I shouldn't say record, but which this very analysis on what the ergon or the work of art is shows itself in a way that's compelling and serious as a scientific endeavor, or put another way, as something that is worthy, something that a serious person can involve themselves in without making themselves ridiculous in a certain way. When we speak of absurdism, it's as though we would recognize that this all seems absurd, but nonetheless, because we have to tackle it, UNESCO or whatever, um, uh, it gains a certain dignity by the mere fact of the very necessity of some of these problems when we think through them with the most seriousness and thoroughness.